Okay, so it's all about our expectations. When I put money into a slot machine, I'm expecting something to happen. If it comes up a loser, do I get all worked up about this? Does this tap me into my accumulated emotional pain of every time I've been wrong and lost in my life? I mean, look at there are people who trade and because of their expectations make every error in the book and can't make consistent money. And the reason why is because of their, like I said, because of their expectations. And yet if they put money into a slot machine, where essentially the only difference between technical trading and a slot machine is the fact that with a slot machine you have to put your money in first and then wait for a pattern to emerge. With technical trading, you have to wait for a pattern to emerge and then technically put your money on the line. The problem is, because of the way our minds think, we think that because the pattern emerged, that somehow or another it's giving us an edge on that particular individual trade. And there's just no way of knowing that. But over a series of trades, it does. So it's like technical analysis gives the individual the availability of being the casino. Technical analysis lets you own the slot machine because you've got the odds in your favor. The casino makes the slot machine available to us because they've got the odds in their favor. But to derive the benefit of those odds, you have to be able to execute properly. And you have to think about this properly. It is just a numbers game based on the odds. That means that you can't put an extraordinary, let's say an extraordinary amount of significance on each individual trade. Because if you sat and played a slot machine, you wouldn't think anything of it. If you played a dollar slot machine and you sat down with the idea that, you know what, I got $100 in my pocket, and you didn't win, you might have, let's say 10 times in a row you didn't win, you're still going to push the button. Because eventually you think, eventually I'm going to hit. Eventually I'm going to hit, so it's all right. You see, it's all right. Same thing here. This trade didn't work. Well, eventually I'll get a winner. This trade didn't work. Eventually I'll get a winner. This trade didn't work. Well, eventually I'll get a winner. Well, I don't know about this next one now. And that's almost always the winner. Now, if it turns out that your methodology has diminished in its, let's say, in its capacity to produce a winning percentage, because the underlying nature of the market is changing in relationship to this fixed formula, then, that's why you trade in smaller sample sizes, or a sample size where you don't lose an inordinate amount of money to find out it's not working. But you do this right, and you're the casino. Regardless of all the dynamic traders, regardless of all this other stuff I'm talking about, it doesn't matter. None of that stuff's important. As long as you understand as long as you understand how the underlying dynamics relates to the formula, so that you don't put an extraordinary amount of significance on a formula that's just giving you a pattern in collective behavior, not individual behavior. And it's individuals who move the market. So those individuals, there can always be an individual or group of individuals who come into the market that do something that completely negates the outcome of your pattern. And that's all right, because there's no way to know that in advance. It's all right. When you look at it that way, then you won't get all worked up. Then it's just a random outcome, just like a slot machine. It's just a random outcome. Because that's what you're expecting. You expect a random outcome, you got a random outcome, and there's no emotional significance. Because here's what happens when you don't look at it this way. Let's take a typical trader who's operating out of the 4 fears. Okay, we got support, we got resistance, we got a nice trading range. The market's coming down to support. Okay? Now, the typical trader operating out of those 4 fears, the fear of being wrong, the fear of losing money, missing out, depending on the intensity of these fears in a given moment, he might have a hard time putting that trade on, right? He's got a viable pattern. All that happened here is that when the market, he had an imbalance in conviction. Remember, all price movements are a result of an imbalance in conviction. The markets came down to this point right here. There wasn't one person in the world, not one, I'm going to say this, not one person in the world, in the whole world, that would take out the bids to offer this market one tick lower than this price right here. Not one. Okay? And then all of a sudden there's an imbalance in conviction where there are more buy orders and sell orders that drives the price up to here. The same thing happens, drives the price down to here. Same thing happens here, here. Now it's coming back down. Now, from my perspective, I'm looking at it like this. How much room do I have to give the market to tell me that the people who bought here and the people who bought here are going to come back into the market and do it again? Because right now there's an imbalance in conviction on the sell side. That means that enough orders, buy orders, have to come into the market to absorb all the offers, to absorb all those offers, with enough left over to create upside movement. Do I have any way of knowing whether or not they're going to come in?
No.
No, I don't. But the odds are in my favor. At least I hope they are. In any case, I'm willing to risk a certain amount of distance from my entry point to find out. That's all it means to me. If they don't come in, it means, you know what? The guys that bought here and bought here, they might be out to lunch. And that happens. I'm not kidding you. I know that for a fact. I've experienced it. Because I intimately knew, a lot of the big traders in certain markets that would buy here. And I'm thinking, okay, they're coming back in, and they were out to lunch. Say, hey, where were you guys? But to the typical trader that doesn't think this way, what's going to happen? If he manages to get the trade on, it's going to be because he thinks he's right. It's because he thinks he knows what's going to happen next. Right? And he's not going to put in a stop, because to predefine his risk, how much money does he have to, how much room and dollar-wise, how much room, distance, of the dollar value of this distance that he has to give the market to tell him that this trade is either working or it's not. Or that to let it go any further isn't worth finding out. That's all it means to me. But he's not going to think that way. He's going to think, by gathering evidence, that this trade might not work. He might be talking himself out of taking it. And so by the time he actually manages to get this order in the market and buy somewhere in here, he has convinced himself that he's right. Now, remember I said earlier, and I think I just said it once, so you might not have gotten it, that fear has an effect on the way we perceive information. When we're in a state of mind of fear, we are perceiving information in a threatening way. In other words, we're having an expectation of pain. And remember I said that to experience emotional pain, there's two kinds of pain, physical pain and emotional pain. Emotional pain requires an interpretation. The up and down ticks that the market offers us are not inherently pleasurable or painful by their nature. There is such a thing as painful information. I mean, painful from the environment's perspective. If someone's hurling insults at you, their intent is to cause you emotional pain. But that doesn't mean you're going to experience the emotional pain unless you interpret it that way. If they're hurling insults at you in a foreign language that you don't have the slightest idea about what they're saying, it may look to you like they're saying something that isn't so nice, but then again, you don't know what the words are, and so what do you feel? Nothing. The interpretations come from our beliefs. The interpretations come from our mental framework. In other words, the pain's already inside of us. All the words are doing is tapping us into it. Once we learn how to manage our interpretations, we can manage the way that we feel. We can actually determine how we feel in our own state of mind. So this trader, he's operating out of a fear of being wrong. So, like I said, he convinces himself that he's right. That's the way he gets a trade on. So let's say the market now, I said that fear causes us to focus on the object of our fear so that we end up creating the very experience we're trying to avoid. This trader is trying to avoid being wrong. Now, we have self-protective mechanisms. They can work at an unconscious level. There are mechanisms inside of us that will protect us from information that we perceive as threatening. It causes what was typically referred to as perceptual blindness, where there are things going on around us that we cannot perceive, even though we have the ability to perceive it, but we're being blinded from it. If I'm afraid of being wrong, what of the information that the market is making available to me, what am I going to focus my attention on, the upticks or the downticks? You're right, the upticks, not the downticks. Meaning that what I will do is I will place an inordinate amount of significance. In other words, the way my mind will automatically weigh this information in terms of what's significant and what isn't, it will give more significance to the upticks than the downticks. Because every time I get an uptick, it will be taking me out of my pain. I'll say, oh, it's finally all over. And then we'll get more downticks. And then we get a couple upticks and say, oh, it's finally all over. In other words, what my mind is doing to protect me is saying that these few upticks are far more significant than all these downticks. Now, do I have the ability to recognize a trend? In other words, being able to define and recognize a trend is one of the most fundamental characteristics of learning technical analysis. A trend is a series of higher highs and higher lows, or lower highs and lower lows. But in this moment, am I able to recognize this as a trend? No, because I'm too focused on getting myself out of the pain, which means that I'm focused on these upticks. Now, our trader's operating both out of a fear of being wrong and a fear of losing money. Now, what ends up happening is this, is that if this were to represent all the negative energy inside of his mind of what it means to be wrong, there's also negative energy inside of his mind about what it means to lose. And as the market moves further and further against his position, his belief about losing will start to gain more and more significance and start to rise to the forefront of his consciousness and make itself known, make its presence known, until finally he gets to a point where he cannot stand losing one more dollar. And that one more dollar, in essence, is when the pain of losing one more dollar is 1 degree greater than the pain of admitting that he's wrong. In other words, when this pain is greater than that pain by 1 degree, he'll get out of the trade. That's when he'll admit that it's a losing trade and get out. You guys with me on this?